And welcome to another episode of the Meditation and Mindfulness Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Zaremba, and today I have a special guest here on the podcast. She's a meditation teacher, an author of 3 books, Worlds of Power, Worlds of Light, The Awkward Years, 64 Tips for Surviving High School, and Peace with Pain, Your Guide to Life in a Malfunctioning Body. Please welcome to the podcast, Jenna Sundell. How you doing, Jenna?
Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Doing great. So welcome. And you're out in sunny California today, is that correct?
Yes, beautiful San Diego.
San Diego, okay. And so what I'd like to start out with is just to find out a little bit about you, where you grew up, where were you born, and what kind of a childhood you had, that kind of thing.
Well, I was born in Massachusetts, and my family was not super religious. My grandmother was. So when our family church, I grew up in a really small town. And so when our family church that we used to go to on Sundays closed when I was around 8, my parents just didn't bother looking for a new one. But my grandmother had a different church, so I would go with her. And after a few years, I just found that it didn't sit right with me. You know, what I would hear them talk about and then how I saw people treat each other didn't match up. So even at that age, I was like, you know what? No, this isn't quite right. So
About how old were you then?
Probably 10 or 11 at that point.
Oh, wow.
And even, younger, and especially through high school, I learned early on at some point, it was like a past life knowledge or something, that if I was upset or having a rough time, if I just sat and did nothing, I would feel better. And so I did not know the word meditation, so I couldn't equate it to that. I just knew that I had this process where if, everything in my head was going crazy or just the whole world was going nuts, I would just take a break and sit, and then I'd be back to being my happy, bouncy self. So
Interesting. So was it a Christian church or a Catholic church that you?
Yeah, it was a Protestant church.
Protestant. Okay.
So,
So you grew up on the East Coast. Me too. Similar story where I was, kind of due to family obligations going to a Catholic Christian church, and just because it was a family tradition, I never personally got anything out of it, and it's all very similar to what you described. People are just kind of going to church as a traditional thing. That's interesting. So, what first got you into the path of self-discovery and meditation, and about how old were you then?
Well, in high school, I grew up in my parents' house was really old. It was built in 1758. So it's like one of the oldest houses in the country. And it definitely had some, supernatural things going on.
Some ghosts?
Yeah, a few ghosts and just weird stuff. And I was always very sensitive. So by high school, I was just intrigued, and I did a lot of searching and found a lot of interesting things, but nothing that really spoke to me or said, this would help me in any way. It was just more interesting data. And it really wasn't until I was in college and I was taking philosophy classes, and that's where I first learned about meditation. And I realized, oh, that's what I do.
Right.
Yeah.
And do you think that was, that natural ability to sit down and kind of still your mind came from, maybe later you found out that did that come from a past life sort of knowledge or experience?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I've spent many past lives in the spiritual world. So
do you remember any specific past life memories, like say when you were younger, or were you attracted? It's like for me, I was attracted, to Asian things, and got into martial arts when I was younger. And I always looked at, when we went to say Chinatown in the local city, I was always attracted to the Asian artwork or the Asian writing. Just something about that attracted me. Was there anything like that in your childhood that you remember?
In my childhood, I had this ability to kind of see into other worlds.
Hmm.
So whether they were past or future, I don't know. But
Like
there's
astral dimensions?
yeah, I guess so.
Hmm.
And but as far as past lives, you know, I've had many remembrances or peeks into that. It's like when I went to London, I found myself walking around the streets and knowing the streets, but what I was seeing was like fields and open pastures. Even though there was buildings there now, it was kind of like it was transposed one on top of the other.
Interesting.
Probably
Wow.
the most intense experience was in San Francisco. I sat down in front of this statue of a goddess Diana, who's a pagan goddess, and
Mhm.
went into this meditation, and I experienced myself being burned at the stake. So that was not fun.
Wow. Interesting. You know,
Yeah.
they say the Statue of Liberty, I think, was modeled after Diana. I could be wrong.
Oh, probably. Yeah, I could see that.
That's interesting. Yeah, I remember being a kid and, very young, like laying in bed and having astral projection experiences that I didn't know what was happening at the time, but later looking back, I can tell what was going on. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
oh, go ahead. Sorry. Oh, I was going to say it's interesting how we have these experiences when we're young and we don't know what to call them until we grow up and become exposed, and then all of a sudden we have a vocabulary and a way of talking about what we experienced.
Totally. It's like, I think a lot of children do have natural out of body or multi-dimensional experiences that it's just, you think that's the norm.
Yeah.
And, maybe we're just not the norm. I don't know. but I think a lot of kids naturally do innately have these experiences. And then, of course, as we grow up, the ego develops, the identity develops, the world comes in. We kind of forget that part of ourselves, and or perhaps it's reawakened later in life when we look around and say, gosh, this can't be all there is, right? There's got to be something more to this. And then we're interested in stuff like meditation. I know for me it came through martial arts, being interested in martial arts, and then my first martial arts teacher taught me some meditation techniques. And so you say in college you took a philosophy class and started becoming interested in meditation there. When did you actually go ahead?
Oh, that's when I actually had a name for what I was doing.
Ah,
I didn't know. I just thought everybody did it. Like you said, it's like, this is normal for me. So everybody, when you get upset, you go and you sit still and your mind stops, and then you're back to center. And it wasn't until college that I discovered that, oh, this is actually a Buddhist practice that people actually work really hard to do. So at that point, I started actively seeking a teacher, a pathway. And San Francisco is such a wonderful place because there was literally hundreds of opportunities to go explore. And I went to one a week for probably close to a year, just hunting and searching until I finally gave up and said, nope, there's nothing real.
okay. And so when did you move out to the West Coast?
I moved out right after high school.
Was that to go to college out there? You said you went to the University of San Francisco?
Right, I went to San Francisco State University.
Oh, okay.
I know the name's almost the same, different school.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved out primarily financial reasons, because I was looking at schools in Boston, and in the late 80s, they were $10,000 a year minimum. And I found out in California, you could go to college basically free. So I moved out and got residency and fell in love with California.
Very awesome. And so you said you started to attend some meditation courses. Now, this is, getting to something that we both have in common. And when did you meet your spiritual teacher, Rama?
I met him in 1992. as I said, I had done the whole circuit of everybody that I could find and didn't find anything real. You know, it all was that same fake experience that I had growing up. And so I completely gave up. I was like, there's nothing real. These people are just pretending.
Mm.
And it was one of my friends that I went to college with. Um, she wound up moving to the same neighborhood I was living in. So she was able to give me a ride home from school because we had classes together. And she was just so bright and so happy. And I hadn't seen her all summer. And I was like, what is going on with you? And she had started studying with Rama. And so she invited me to go meet her mentor. And from there it was, I met my mentor, and then she introduced me to Rama, and I just knew instantly, like, oh, you're the guy I've been looking for.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, it's so fascinating, all the ways, you know, a little bit of background. We're talking about Rama. His name was Dr. Frederick Lenz. He was a spiritual teacher who began out in California teaching students in the early 80s, and became enlightened. And it wasn't until, you know, we kind of came on board a little bit later. He found us, we found him around the same time. It was my graduating year of high school was 92. And it was interesting because I didn't even know what was going on. There was a real quick story about how I discovered it. I was doing this this thing at high school one day. You know, I was 18, and it was like it was around March, I think, of 92. And I found a bunch of these. We were in the auditorium, and I was playing in this band, and we just got done, and there was a bunch of these yantras, these Sri yantras, like laying around the auditorium. Someone had come in and left them there, and I saw them, but it didn't quite register what it was. And it's funny because other people were like, "Hey, man, you might be into this." I was like, "Oh yeah, whatever." You know, I was too interested in being Jim Morrison back then. And you know, and then it was like a week later or something that I met my mentor, you know, one of Rama's students who was going around and teaching at the time. And I met her. Her name was Jordan. And she was the one who finally took me to the first seminar. And, you know, very similar experience. The first time I met or saw Rama, it was an instant familiarity. I just knew that this guy had the goods. It was his sense of humor. It was his ability to speak on self-discovery, enlightenment. And there was just this sense that, you know, this is the real deal. And, you know, such an amazing encounter. So, you know, of course, I was over on the East Coast. So you met Rama, it was on the West Coast at the time?
Right, in San Francisco.
Nice. And so tell me a little bit about your, you know, your first encounters and experiences with Rama and getting involved with a spiritual community like that.
Well, that's the whole subject of my book, Worlds of Power, Worlds of Light, is my meeting with Rama and kind of the experiences that I went through studying with him. But as you said, you know, that first meeting with him, when we sat down to meditate, it was just that instant remembrance of like, oh, yes, I know who you are. And of course, yes, this is who I've been looking for. This is the practice and the experiences that I've been seeking. And I can't really say I joined the organization because I was very shy at the time. I didn't have much self-confidence, and I was laser focused only on him. It was like I didn't really care about any of the other students. I would go to the seminars, and I was just there to see Rama. So during the breaks, I would just take out my notebook and I'd be writing notes, and I didn't talk to very many people. I tried to get involved in the different projects that he set up, but I was not much of a joiner. So it was, like I said, I was just there to be with my teacher, and that was it.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. And Who was your original mentor? You know, how Rama had some of his students go out and start teaching. Did you have someone like that as well?
Well, her name was Tara, and
Hmm.
I only sat with her a few times. My first meeting with her, I felt really bad because I was so egotistical at the time. When I met her, she pulled up in her Mercedes and her suit, and all of her other students all dressed alike. They had their, khakis on and their polo shirts, and I was a total hippie deadhead. So I had complete judgment of like, who
Right.
does this woman think she is? And I was just psychically hammering her the whole time. And then we went for a walk and we sat and meditated, and I had some very interesting experiences. And then she asked what they were, and I didn't really care what she thought of me, so I told her, and expecting some sort of ridicule or just to be blown off. And she actually connected with me and started explaining what I was seeing. And that kind of woke me up a little bit and said, oh wait, there's something here. And then when she started talking about her teacher, it just clicked in my mind. It's like, no, that's who I'm looking for. It's like, you're just an obstacle in my way. And I had to go, because of how Rama structured the program, I had to go through her to see him. But after probably the second time I saw him, it wasn't, our little group didn't have to do that anymore. We were somehow just allowed to go to events without her.
Right. And
So I didn't really get to know her that well because, like I said, I only spent a short time with her.
and that was around 92?
92, yeah.
Gotcha. The spring or summer?
Yeah, it had to have been the fall of 92, and then by spring of 93, Rama invited us to study directly. So we had the ordination, I want to say, in April of 1993.
Exciting times.
Yeah.
Exciting times. Looking back on that, it seems like a lifetime ago, and yet it's so surreal to even think back on all the memories and experiences we had. You know, to try to put it into context for people listening or watching, it's Rama, our spiritual teacher, was an enlightened guru, if you will. He didn't really go with the traditional guruing, like a lot of a lot of the imagery that you might think of when you think guru. You think, beard, long hair, or whatever it might be, robes. He was a modern spiritual teacher who took career and school, working in the world very, very seriously. And obviously meditation was a big part of how you evolved and how you approached your career. And so one of the careers he would recommend was computer science. He was a very big believer that computer science not only provided a great career, but developed the mind to a great extent to allow you to meditate at very advanced high levels by developing the concentration ability and, as I said, giving you a good career so you weren't victim to, let's say, money, which is which is a problem for a lot of people. And he recognized that and addressed it by giving us a path to take. And I think, it's interesting you say you were a deadhead prior to getting into it. So, it's interesting because, I was 17, 18, I experimented with psychedelics, and it gave me these dramatic experiences of cosmic consciousness that it seemed like nobody knew what I was talking about until I met Rama's student, Jordan, who was the mentor who took me to meet Rama. And she seemed like the only one who understood what I was trying to describe with these cosmic consciousness experiences of oneness, etc. And then, so it's interesting because when we went to see Rama for the first time, it was like, oh, this guy, he has acid humor. And, like this special humor about life, that just, it just made sense. But, you know, did you ever try to get into the computer science direction that he was recommending?
Well, yeah, even though, because Rama wanted to work with us on a project. He was like, I can't, to help you develop spiritually, we need something in the physical to talk about. That was his method of teaching, is you need a physical project. And he recommended computer science, but he also said, if there's something that you want to do, let me know. And I heard that and instantly jumped on it. And so I said, well, I'm a writer. I want to work with you as a writer. And so he allowed me to do that, but he still made me go to computer school. Because writers don't.
Did you do CLC?
I did.
This is the early 90s, folks. Computer Learning Center was all the rage, at least where we were.
I didn't go there. It was a community college, Westchester Business Institute. I don't even think it's in, I don't even know if it's still there or not, but it was one of those, just like CLC, it was one of those 18-month programs where you learn how to code, you learn a little basics about databases, and then you can get your first job. And it worked. So, I mean, I got into the computer field. I was able to become a computer consultant in all phases of software development.
Nice.
And
wow.
He moved the program from all the 7 different cities he was teaching to New York. I don't know if you were in New York when you met him or not.
Yes.
So he made us all move to you guys. And
so you moved from California to New York around, was it 92 or 93?
Yeah, it was in 93. So fall of 93. I left college and
sort of when he closed the program down to the public, I believe, and wanted to work more closely with, the students that he had accepted. That's great. So you actually got a job and worked in the computer field for a little while, huh?
Yeah, I did very well. And I, lived in New York for 3 years. And after the major snowstorms that closed Manhattan, I think that was probably 95, maybe. I was out visiting a friend in San Diego in December, and it was 80 degrees. And I was like, why don't I live here again? So in 96, I decided to move back, but because my employers liked me so much as a consultant, they let me keep my job. So I worked at home and then flew to New York once a month. And Rama would just happen to be having a seminar when I was in town, most months, not every month, but so that was exciting.
Yeah, it was a very interesting time. I went to the computer school. It never quite clicked for me. When Rama asked us to choose between some sort of a project to work with him on, I chose music. He sort of had a group of people doing music and computer science and I guess writing and authoring as well. So you decided to, going back one step, you decided to write the book, and this was your project that you had set out with Rama. So were you an author prior to that, or what made you get into writing?
I've always written, like, even I got my first journal when I think I was like probably 10. And from then, just writing about my day. And it became such a powerful way for me to process what I experienced in the world that I just kept doing it. And then in high school, I would catch poetry. I can't say I wrote it. It's just like, it's kind of like it would just appear in my head. And if I could get to a pen fast enough, I could write it down. And I had a wonderful English teacher who encouraged me to keep writing, and she gave me tremendous freedom in English class. How you're supposed to sit at your desk and write the essay. I could never do that. So I would stand up and start pacing trying to get my first sentence, and then she'd finally be like, you need to go for a walk, and I'd be like, yes, please. So I'd take my paper and I'd go walk the halls, and I'd come back with a completed essay. And so writing's just always been in my blood, I guess. And she, I'd show her my poetry and my other writing, and she would critique it, which at the time was very hard on the ego, but it made me a better writer. So I kept going back for more. And I started writing different books before I met Rama, but I never finished any. It's like I'd get to a certain point and just stop. This was before I knew anything about computers, so I was writing longhand. I had an old typewriter, and my first book I started writing, I was typing it up from my longhand written pages, and I got halfway through typing it up and just felt crushed because I realized I'm going to have to retype all this because I need to edit it. And so it really was thanks to Rama getting me into computers that allowed me to actually become a serious writer.
Using a word processor and being able to edit.
Exactly.
So you went into writing your first book, Worlds of Power, Worlds of Light. And that's a very interesting title. And it's about meeting Rama and some of your experiences with Rama. Rama used to have these desert trips. Curious if you ever got a chance to go on those. I didn't, unfortunately.
Oh, you never made it to the desert?
Met the desert with them.
Such magic. I mean, it sounds ridiculous when I tell stories about it because, what did you say earlier? He had some acid humor because it was like that. You'd go out there and see these phenomenal things. And I talk about some of them in my book. Like there was one where I saw Rama like skating across the sand. Like he was not picking his feet up. He was just like he was skating. And then he would stand and put his hands up, and light would shoot out of both hands and out the top of his head like this. And he'd get really, really tall, like 50 feet tall. And then he would disappear. And then there would be sounds. Like there was one night I heard a rattle, like a Native American rattle. Yeah. And as I'm sitting there in the cold, because at night, we'd go out at night under the stars, and I'd sit there shivering, and I decided, that's just like a can blowing in the wind. That's all it is. And then after he would do all these miracles, he'd ask us, what did you see? And I heard someone else on the other side of the circle describe all those things that I saw. Not just one person, but different people. Like one person yelled out, I heard a rattle. And I'm like, oh my God.
I'm not tripping.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, whoa, I didn't make that up in my head. I really saw it.
And for those of you listening, watching, what we're describing here is what are called the Citta Powers. The Citta Powers are widely unknown in the West. And Rama was an advanced meditator. I mean, beyond the norm, a fully enlightened being, and also a Citta master, which is a rare occurrence. And it sounds crazy to talk about these things, but I can confirm what Jenna's saying, because a lot of those things you would also see him do in the seminars that he would give on a monthly basis, turning rooms gold, seeing the light, feeling the energy, going into different dimensions, seeing him levitate, disappear. These Citta powers are real. They're just not very well known here in the West, but they're powers and abilities that are developed through countless, who knows how many lifetimes of meditation that it requires. But they are miracles to the average individual, what they seem like. And Rama was never someone to show them off, to boast. It was more a way to inspire us to motivate us to believe, to see beyond the norm, because we live in such a world where, you know, miracles are few and far between. And, you know, to actually see these things occur, and then to have the confirmation that you're saying that other people saw exactly what you saw, it just really makes you in awe of this individual, and want to pursue meditation and pursue that path of self-discovery. So yes, he was quite an extraordinary individual. And I just think it was such a blessing and fortunate for us to have, you know, had the opportunity to be his student, and to continue to be his student to this day. I'm a firm believer that, you know, I'm still his student.
Exactly. He's very much around, and even my students who never met him physically have had Rama encounters.
Wow.
In meditation or in dreams, or one woman, one student even felt like he showed up at Costco to tease her because she was having a rough day, and this guy that looked exactly like his picture, like, kind of showed up and made her, you know.
Oh yeah, and in dreams. So, you know, you had your encounter, and were a student of Rama's. And when did you finally? You say you moved back to California around, was it 95?
96.
96. And so when had you already written Worlds of Power, Worlds of Light? Was it published by that time?
It wasn't published, it was written. And how it worked is I would write a draft and then I would send it to Rama and he would read it. And it was internally, I could feel him read it. And all of a sudden I'd get all this like download of changes to make, you know, things to improve and work on. So we went through many drafts like that.
Wow.
And about 96, I was actually seeking a traditional publisher for it. So I was sending out a lot of queries and getting a lot of rejections and refining my queries and revising the book. And I didn't finally release it. I released the first version in 1998 after he passed. Some students heard that I had written a book and they started asking me for it and saying, you know, just make us, you know, I'll pay to make Kinko's copies if you'll just give us a copy.
Wow.
So that's what I did is somebody held an event after Rama had died for people that were interested in teaching. And so I brought 40 copies of my book that were just Kinko's copies, you know, printed out, and they all got sold. Everybody wanted one.
Oh, cool.
So from there, I went and looked into on-demand publishing. It just started, where you wouldn't have to buy 1,000 copies of a book. You could just put it upload it, and then people could buy them one at a time. And so that's how I published the first version. And then I updated it a few years ago and published a 15-year anniversary edition. So that's what's available now on Amazon.
Nice. Well, so after moving back to California and writing the book, when did you decide to become a meditation teacher?
Well, I actually started teaching in New York. I was one of the first of our generation to accept the teaching empowerment. It was in 1994. There was a room full of probably 400 people, and Rama offered a teaching empowerment, said, if you want to teach meditation, stay. And I was shocked because there was only 12 people that stayed. I was like, out of all these people, nobody wants to share this? I mean, how can you not want to share? And so I stayed for that teaching empowerment. And he told us, you know, empowerments have a catch, that if you accept it, you have to use it. You know, if you don't, bad things can happen to your consciousness. So he told us, he was very, very kind. He says, I'm going to give you a teaching empowerment, but you don't have to teach meditation. You just have to teach something. So we accepted, those of us who were there accepted the teaching empowerment, and I was very excited. So my first class was at the Westchester Library in White Plains.
Okay.
And I taught a class there, and I'll never forget, it was my very first class, and I had probably 20 people show up.
Wow.
But they ranged from, they had all the kids that had just gotten out of school, high school, and then all the senior citizens. So it was about half, teenagers and half, 60, 70-year-olds. So it was a very interesting experience trying to keep them both engaged.
Right.
And after that, I taught again at the same place and did not have quite as big a crowd. I had a different group come in and challenge the whole idea of meditation. So that kind of put me off a little bit.
Oh, wow.
And
there's always that opposition. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Let me ask you, were you
there,
teaching a particular technique at that time? Was it the...
I was sharing, the Rama's technique of chakra meditation. Because that's what, he taught us, and it was very effective for me. It was like, with this day and age, it's like, if you want something that's going to produce results fast, chakra meditation works, but it comes with that catch that you got to practice mindfulness too.
Right. And it's interesting, how much nowadays there is online about meditation and the different styles. And it seems like the word mindfulness has just become sort of a buzzword. And that's one of the things that I seek to do here with the podcast and, my Facebook group, Meditation and Mindfulness, is to kind of bring, my experience of what mindfulness truly is out into the world. It's not just, looking at an app and remembering to breathe every hour or whatever they're telling you it is. And so I think there's a definite need for, what we have to offer the world. So that's great. And so you moved back to California, and tell me a little bit about, you're currently a teacher at the Dharma Center.
Right.
And so tell me a little bit about, the Dharma Center, how that got started, and the story about that.
Well, that's another Rama miracle. So I moved to San Diego, but I was still going to New York and getting to see Rama, and I'd be here in San Diego doing my work online, and every so often I just get, these psychic hits that I should be teaching, that you should be teaching meditation. And I'd be like, if there's students here, Rama will come out and teach them. I don't need to do that. Who am I to teach? And,
right.
And then I went to New York and got the phone call that he had passed away. He was no longer in the body, and, it was very shocking. And then when I got back home to San Diego, it was like, well, he's not coming to teach, so I have to fulfill my promise and start teaching. So I started by just renting a room, and that was very labor intensive, to go to somebody else's space and set up for meditation and try to take people into silent mind. And
right.
At the time I met some other Rama students from the 80s generation. So that his passing, started this whole reconnection of generations of Rama students, which was really interesting. Yeah. And I was talking to Lynn Miller, and she had just started teaching as well. And so I said, well, hey, I'm going to rent an office space. You want to go in on an office space, and that way it's ours. And so she was like, well, maybe. And I was working at home, and I picked up this free newspaper they used to deliver to our driveway every week. And I usually just threw it in the recycling. But this week I opened it up, and there's an office space for rent, and it's in my budget, which wasn't very much. And I said, okay, I'll go check it out. And I walk down there, and I walk into this courtyard where the address is. And then I had this memory from about a year before. I had walked into that same courtyard and looked around at the trees and how it was set off the street, and said, oh, this would be a really nice place for a meditation hall.
Mm.
There I am, to look at office space there. And it had everything that we needed, the separate meditation room with a closet and the bathroom. And I had run out of excuses. So I called up my friend Lynn and said, hey, you got to come check out this place. And she came down and looked at it. And when I had looked at it, I was just seeing gold light everywhere. And she looks at the walls and she's looking around. She's got this funny look on her face. And I'm like, all excited. I'm like, so what do you think? I'm going to do it. And she's like, well, do you think they'll let us paint? And that was the first time I actually saw the color of the walls. It was that 70s mauve purple, and the carpets were orange. so, So, of course, I laughed because I didn't even, like I said, I didn't even see the colors of the walls. And
Right.
so I said, of course, they'll let us paint. And she was still like, oh, I don't know if I really want to do this. And as we were walking out, I said, well, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to call it Dharma Center. And at that point, she said, okay, I'll jump in. So she and I started this little meditation hall.
And this was 98, 99?
1998, September 1998. So we just turned 21.
Wow.
Yeah. And I started taking attendance in 2002. So since that time, attendance at our classes, we hit over 13,000. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's amazing. Congrats.
Yeah.
What methods of advertising were you using back then to get people to come?
We did just little hand printed flyers from my inkjet printer. So
handed them out everywhere.
As much as I could. Lynn was close to retirement age, and so she was really just more interested in decorating and teaching. And then I was very sick at the time. I could barely stand up most days. So I would try and get out to the farmer's market to hand out flyers once in a while. But most of our advertising was just this sidewalk sign that we put out on the sidewalk. And our friends at the Rama sites, ramalila.com, ramalila.org, they actually helped build us a website. So that's how people would find us, was either through the website or our sidewalk sign.
Indeed, Rama site. I remember that one. Is that still up?
It's still up, and it's being revitalized a little bit here and there. So.
Yeah. It was so amazing, and Rama was, he prophesized that we would all come back together, I think, in the future. And he foresaw that I think we would all meet again on the internet, and he called it the electronic tribe, right?
Right. Yeah.
And I always remember, I think it was in 85 that he went to, was it the Continental Divide? It was one of those talks where he went.
I think so, yeah.
He was talking about the electronic tribe. I love that talk. So that's so cool. So that kind of brings me up to your second book, Peace with Pain. And that's, your guide to life in a malfunctioning body. So tell me what spurred that on? You said that you had gotten sick. Tell me a little bit about that story and what had happened and what inspired that book.
Well, as you know, Rama was super into martial arts and physical fitness and just having a really strong body. Indeed. And my whole life, I'd never been very athletic. I was when I was really little, and I had a bike accident when I was 9. And after that, I was just never athletic. I never really pushed myself physically. It was all, just mental pursuits. And I meet Rama, and so now I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a keto black belt. And so I started doing the keto. I started doing sit-ups and going running, and I could never get the breathing right. And then I moved to, I started feeling, I'd have episodes where I get really weak and didn't really know what was going on, and just kind of blew it off. Said, oh, I got to work harder. That was my mindset, was just push harder. Sure. And so I moved to San Diego, and now I'm working at home, so I'm not having to interact with people. And I started to have more intense episodes where I would literally like fall out of my chair and my muscles would all seize and I couldn't get up for half an hour. And I went to doctor after doctor. They're still not giving me any answers. It took until I actually got a smartphone in 2015. So so that was started in 1998. Yeah, a little before Rama died. I started getting sick, and I even contemplated calling him and asking him what's going on in my body, but I never did. And I finally got this smartphone. It had an oximeter in it, and it turned out my oxygen levels were dropping. So my entire body was being starved of oxygen randomly throughout the day, and that's why I would collapse. And then it took another 2 years to find a cardiologist that figured out exactly what was causing it. And so just a couple years ago, a year and a half ago, I got a little heart implant that sealed up the hole that was causing the problem.
Oh.
But through all of this process, like I said, I would go to doctor after doctor and be in severe pain, passing out, complete fatigue, totally disabled. I lost my job because I couldn't work. I would try, and I just couldn't keep deadlines. And but I had my meditation practice. I had my mindfulness practice. So even as I'm spinning out into these really dark places where I just, was like, please just die already, that training that Rama gave to us would kick in. I'd be in bed just trying to sleep or trying to rest, and I hadn't meditated yet. And so in my head, one of the mantras that Rama had given us would start in my head, and I'd be like, okay, I'll focus on my mantra. And so I do that for 10 minutes and sit up as much as I could, and then I would be able to go to sleep. So even on the days I couldn't get out of bed, I would still find a way to meditate, or my body would force me to meditate. And when I finally learned how to pace myself and started rebuilding up my strength, I started meeting other people who also had pain and realized they were suffering even worse than I was because they didn't have the tools that I have. So that's what inspired the book. Is I wrote this book for the people that couldn't come and sit with me physically.
Now, say there's someone out there listening who is in pain. What tip would you give them for just like a little snippet of information of how you can help them?
I would say the biggest thing is to listen to your body and be gentle with yourself. And the body has its own intelligence, and it knows when we need to rest. It knows when we need to move. It knows when we need to eat. It knows when we need to sleep. But we have so much conditioning, so much pressure from society of that. No, if you sleep for 16 hours, you're lazy. It's like, but your body might actually need 16 hours of sleep. So that's probably the biggest thing, is just to listen and follow through.
Absolutely. And that's what meditation has allowed a lot of people to do, is to learn how to listen and become more sensitive, feel more, and just be more in tune with not only your mind but also your body. I mean, that's right. Definitely a huge benefit. So after writing Peace with Pain, tell me a little bit about what's going on now. So you're working now, it's full-time at the Dharma Center, teaching meditation to people. What do you find is one of the most challenging aspects of teaching meditation to, let's say, like a newcomer? Somebody comes in, they're interested in meditation. Walk me through what kind of like process that looks like when you first get like a brand new student in there. What do you show them? What do you teach them? Well,
it really depends on the student, because at Dharma Center, we're completely public. we have, I have a private program too for people that have been around a long time, and we have our membership program, but our classes each week, they're completely public. So I never know who's going to walk in, what level of experience they have. And it's very interesting because most of the people that show up and they say, oh, I've never meditated before. But then as they talk, you realize that, oh, wait, you actually have meditated. You just didn't call it that. You do your breathing, or you do your walking, or you're sitting, whatever. And so what I try to teach every brand new student is to sit every day. Twice a day is better. But even if it's for that 1 minute, to simply sit and allow themselves to be still every day, to let go of everything, is the foundation of the practice. And then the second thing is the mind training that leads to mindfulness. So, Rama taught us this game of where you watch your thoughts, you pay attention, and anything that's not happy or bright or progressive, anything that feels heavy and is making you suffer, you bounce it out by focusing on beauty or gratitude. And it becomes this little game you play all day long. It's like you feel yourself spinning out. It's like you find something in your environment and you're like, oh, a Buddha, I'm going to focus on that and see how beautiful it is. And
I've got the same book.
You have the same one.
The little, yeah. I don't know where he went. Indeed.
And so that's the pathway I teach them into mindfulness. And I also explain that itself is not mindfulness. Mindfulness is just being fully present with what is. But to get from where you are, completely scattered, to that stillness, we have all these little games and tools that we use. Absolutely.
That's great. So if you have sort of a message to the world, what would that be? If it's related to meditation, or what kind of words of wisdom?
Words of wisdom, I don't know. Let's see, I would say to be kind, to yourself, first and foremost, to be kind to yourself, because when you're kind to yourself, then you are automatically kind to everyone that you meet.
I love that.
My latest blog I actually posted is called How to Love Yourself, because so many people, they skip over that, and they don't realize that if you're treating yourself badly, then in your distracted moments, you're going to treat everyone else badly. So it's truly a service to, that's why the Buddha recommended, you work on yourself first, and then you go out and share the way.
That's so true. And it's probably one of the most difficult things, to love yourself fully. And I think that's where a lot of people do have a struggle, to fully accept the self, and, even our shadows, and to, just embrace that. That's some great advice. Well, Jenna, it's been about an hour here, so I want to wrap up the interview. And is there anything else that you wanted to say? And I want you to tell people where they can find you online, and where they can find the Dharma Center if they're in San Diego, right?
Right. So we have, I've got a couple websites. There's dharmacenter.com, and that's for our center in San Diego. And even if you're not in San Diego and you want to meditate with me and the other teachers, we have this membership program, and the members are really the ones who support the center. So we have a monthly membership, or you can pay once a year, and that gives you access to Zoom classes. So they're live classes that you can dial in and sit with a teacher. So we do that a few times a month. And then we have our public classes, like I said, sometimes those are broadcast via Zoom. But if you're in San Diego, come sit with us. You can look on dharmacenter.com for the website. Or, as I mentioned earlier, I have a blog site that I keep as well. It's jennasundell.com.
Okay.
And you can find my books. I also publish a blog up there. I think I just published my 140th blog. So there's lots of information about meditation up there. There's even videos with techniques you can use. So go check it out. I'm also on Facebook quite frequently, probably too much. And sometimes on Twitter, but I haven't figured out the Twitterverse yet.
I'll put all those links down in the description below. If you're on YouTube, you can find those there, the various websites, and also the links to Jenna's books. I definitely recommend checking out Worlds of Power, Worlds of Light, if you want some great tales of power and stories about our enlightened teacher, Rama, Dr. Frederick Lenz, who was just an amazing being. And as well, if you're out there battling with any type of disease, pain, whatever it might be, check out Peace with Pain. And Jenna's advice is priceless. It's a pleasure talking with you today, Jenna. I thank you so much. And you're out there doing great work, and we appreciate that very much. So thank you folks today for watching on YouTube and listening on the Apple Podcasts. I'm your host, Rob Zaremba, with Jenna Sundell. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Take care. Thanks, Jenna. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.